everyone, welcome to another episode of Dollar Dialogue. Today's episode 34, the influence of France on the Alliance of Sahel States. And our guest speaker for today is Mr. Risshit Sikka. Mr. Risshit Sikka is a junior at the American International School, Dhaka, AISD. He's currently in grade 11 and he's very much interested in the field of economics and the Alliance of Sahel States is one of the organizations that he is very much intrigued by. In fact, the region of Sahel and specifically the countries that are in the Alliance of Sahel States fascinated him a lot, and for this reason he has been studying them a lot and studying them a lot to try to understand the economies. And he's also very much intrigued by the French culture and by the influence of France on those nations. And for this reason, we are very glad to have him here with us today. And Mr. Risshit Sikka is a very talented individual again in the fields of economics and finance, and he's a wonderful speaker and he's a wonderful individual on this topics. And we're very glad to have such a talented individual in our podcast, Dollar Dialogue. Thank you, Mr. Risshit Sikka, for joining us today. Is there anything that you would like to add to the introduction?
Yes, Araf, thank you for inviting me. And, Dollar Dialogue is one of the best podcasts of Bangladesh. And I'm really excited to talk about the Sahel states. And I've been, studying them for many years and pretty much my whole life at this point. And I'm really excited to talk about them.
Thank you, Mr. Risshit Sikka, and thank you so much for your opinion on Dollar Dialogue, and we are very glad to have you here with us today. And again, our topic of discussion for today's episode 34, the influence of France on the Alliance of Sahel States. Now let's start. The Alliance of Sahel States, ASS, also known as the Alliance des États du Sahel, AES in French, is a confederation formed by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Established on September 16, 2023, with the signing of the Liptako-Gorma Charter, the alliance aims to enhance regional stability, economic independence and self-reliance among its members. And again, the member states are Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. And one of the key objectives of this alliance is to have regional stability and security. There have been joint military cooperations which have been conducted to counter armed groups, resulting in significant action against terrorist organizations and enhancing security in the region. And there are also plans for economic interdependence. The plans are underway to establish a common central bank and introduce a new currency to replace the CFA franc, aiming to reduce reliance on external financial systems. Moreover, there's also a lot of calls for infrastructure development. There have been significant investments have been made in energy, communications, and agriculture infrastructure to boost economic growth and self-reliance. The introduction of biometric passport for ASS citizens is set to promote regional integration and mobility. In November 2024, the ASS announced the implementation of free roaming, no roaming charges for mobile services between member countries effective January 2025. Moreover, there have been also a lot of diversified partnerships. The ASS has sought to diversify its international partnerships, reducing reliance on traditional Western allies and seeking new alliances with countries in Asia and the Middle East. Moreover, the withdrawal of the Western forces, the alliance has achieved the withdrawal of French and American military forces from the region, marking a significant step toward national sovereignty. And there also have been, again, a lot of recent developments. The Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, as I said before, have announced plans to introduce new biometric passports as part of their withdrawal from the Economic Community of West Africa States, ECOWAS, and the formation of ASS. The ASS also has taken steps towards integrating the telecommunications market with plans to eliminate roaming charges between member states starting next month in January 2025. Moreover, the Sahel region continues to face significant security challenges with extreme violence surging across the area. In fact, the first 7 months of 2023 saw at least 7,800 civilian deaths, indicating a significant increase in violence. And the information of the ASS and the subsequent withdrawal from ECOWAS have led to regional fragmentation and increased tension. This move has implications for regional cooperation, particularly in addressing security threats and economic developments. The Alliance of Sahel States, ASS, represents a significant shift in the geopolitical landscape of West Africa, with member countries seeking greater autonomy and regional integration. However, the alliance faces challenges including ongoing security threats and the need for effective implementation of its economic and infrastructure initiatives. So that's a very brief introduction about the Alliance of the Sahel States, ASS. What's your opinion on the new alliance that has been formed in this part of the world, and what do you think are its implications for the people who live here, the economic implication as well? How do you think this might affect the influence of France on the Alliance of Sahel States? Mr. Risshit Sikka, Mr. Arif Malik, or Mr. Shazib Karim?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting topic, and I think the France's economic influence on the Sahel states is very strong, and it has both benefits and challenges. So I think the relationship rooted in colonial history has evolved, but still shows sign of economic dependence between the two countries, the two alliances. French companies are major players in important industries like mining, energy, and even telecommunications. For example, I remember that French firms dominate uranium mining in Niger, which is vital for both Niger's economy and France's nuclear energy sector. But while this involvement brings investment and jobs, I think critics argue that the benefits mostly favor with France, with even little reinvestment in local communities, and they're kind of neglecting the alliance. So, what do you guys think about this?
Yeah, Rishit, thank you for that. I'd say that was a very insightful analysis, but I think I find it kind of fascinating and frankly a little troubling that French companies dominate critical sectors like mining, especially uranium in Niger, like you had mentioned, Rishit. And while it's true that this brings investments and job opportunities, the disproportionate benefits to French interests raises serious questions. And like, for example, Niger's uranium is essential for France's nuclear energy sector, yet the local communities often see it little reinvestment. And another point you made that really stands out is France's influence through international aid and financial institutions. And while development aid for infrastructure, education, and healthcare is undoubtedly valuable, it comes with I'd say that it comes with strings attached. It often shapes policies in ways that might not align with the region's priorities. But let's not forget the other side of the coin. French investments and development aid to stabilize these fragile economies to some extent, especially in the face of security challenges. And the real question here is whether the Sahel states can leverage this aid and investment to build sustainable, self-reliant economies, or if they risk falling into a deeper cycle of dependency. So yes, so since we're talking about this, I have a question to ask you guys. Rishit, I know you're an expert at this, so will you please answer this, Rishit? So my question to you is, or Arif and Arif, you guys can also chime in, but Rishit, my question to you is, should Sahelian states lean into their economic ties with France, reform them, or look for alternative partners altogether?
Mr. Arif Malik, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I think what Shazib has asked is a very intriguing question, and I would like to say that it's a multifaceted issue, but just to bring some perspective into the issue, I think we first have to understand the region of Sahel both geographically and politically, because we have to understand that the Sahel is a very arid area, and the Alliance of the Sahel States is a collective endeavor which is aimed at addressing the issues of poverty, terrorism, and climate change. And historically, France has played a significant role in this region, from the colonization of these francophone nations to present day investments. And I would say that the influence of France has been both constructive and controversial, shaping the dynamics of the region in profound ways. For example, there's a very famous French proverb that goes along the lines of, if I'm not mistaken, tout ce qui brille n'est pas or. And that basically means that all that glitters is not gold. And this suggests that the visible impact of France has layers that warrant a very closer, more critical examination beyond the surface level. And I have previously, as a delegate in Model United Nations, I've represented the Sahel states in many instances. And I would say, from my understanding of the Sahel, that the post-colonial relationship has oscillated between supportive and paternalistic, in my opinion. And I would say that this historical backdrop sets the stage for current economic and military strategies that Paris has deployed in the region. Because economically speaking, France has been a significant player in the Sahel through aid, trade, foreign direct investment. And according to the French Ministry of for Europe and Foreign Affairs, France has allocated over 1 billion euros in the development aid to Sahel countries in 2019. And while this figure illustrates France's commitment to aiding the region's development, the effectiveness and motivations behind this aid are often questionable, in my opinion, because in my opinion, the French aid has not sufficiently translated into sustainable development or poverty alleviation. Sahel is one of the most poorest regions of the world, and this goes on to show that the aid is not really working. And this begs the question: what is the reason for this economic stagnation, high unemployment, high structural unemployment, to be specific, in these countries? And I would say that the reason for this is the rampant corruption that is prevalent in the Sahel, and also the prevalence of terrorist organizations in the Sahel. And to provide some military context into this, for example, while I was researching about this topic, I found that France's military presence in the Sahel under Operation Barkhane has been substantial, involving over 5,000 troops at its peak, aimed at countering jihadist groups. And while this intervention has helped to disperse militant groups in the area temporarily, the long-term effectiveness and consequences of such military involvement sparks debate. And for example, the military expenditure by Sahel countries has soared, with nations like Mali allocating with nearly 13% of government defense only for countering terrorist groups. So obviously terror is a big part. So I would say, to answer Shazib's question, that I would say as of now, the Sahel states as the economic terms, as opportunity cost wise, I would say the Sahel states, the opportunity cost of not relying on France is to not rely on anyone, because the UN doesn't provide that much aid in the region. Frankly speaking, the UN has more critical issues to delve into, for example, HIV and the rampant healthcare crisis that was in Africa, that has been prevalent in Africa. So I would say overall, as of now, the Sahel states should rely on France for economic aid, but I would say that these countries need to stand up themselves rather than relying on French aid, because self-reliance is ultimately what many of the economies around the world aim for. I see Risshit's hand is raised. Yes, Risshit, would you like to chime in?
Yes, Ari, that was a very interesting point, and I actually agree with your point. And regarding Shaz's question of what should Sahel states do, I think it's very important to have like a strategic and balanced approach to address their economic relationship with France. So, for example, I think they should maybe diversify economic partnerships, maybe engage with other international partners such as China, Russia, the EU, or other African regions and other places in Africa. Also, like, build stronger trade and investment relationships within Africa through the frameworks like the CFTA, I remember, the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is like a trading organization. And maybe they should also negotiate and have like equitable contract with French companies that ensure better profit sharing and reinvestment in local infrastructure and communities, which is obviously like a big problem in those states. So yeah, and also maybe having alliances like the G5 Sahel to collectively bargain for better terms in international trade and investment agreements. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement, and a lot of things can be done in the progress. So I would like to give my mic back to Araf. I see his hands raised, and what would you like to say, Araf, about this topic?
I believe that was Mr. Shazib's hand raised. Mr. Shazib, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, sorry, my internet a bit laggy.
Yeah, no worries, Risshit. No worries. It happens. But yeah, Risshit and Ari, both of you guys give a very insightful analysis, and I would like to applaud you for it. And I would completely agree with what you guys said. And I think, to add my own opinion and to answer my own question, like to give my own opinion on this, basically, is I'd say that my answer would be similar to your guys' as well, and that the answer would lie in a more balanced approach that combines reform and diversification. And I'd say it's because, Sahelian states should push for a renegotiation of economic agreements to ensure more equitable partnerships, and this includes advocating for fair revenue sharing. Like, for example, countries like Niger should receive a larger share of profits from industries such as uranium mining mining, ensuring that local communities benefit directly from their natural resources. And also, French companies should be required to invest in local expertise and infrastructure, enabling Sahelian states to build self resilience in key industries. And despite the criticisms, France's development aid and investments remain critical for stabilizing Sahelian economies, especially in areas like infrastructure, healthcare, and education. Sahelian states can use this aid strategically to fund long term development projects while working towards reducing dependency over time. And I'd also say that sole reliance on France limits the Sahel's ability to negotiate better terms and fosters dependency. And Sahelian states should explore partnerships with other global players, like you had mentioned, Risshit, like China, Turkey, or Gulf nations, as well as intra African cooperation through regional bodies like ECOWAS or the African Union, because diversification is crucial, and diversification offers a lot of things and multiple different factors, like for example new investments. Countries like China are willing to invest heavily in infrastructure, energy, and manufacturing, providing alternatives to French-led initiatives. And I think and China are as we know, China are investing heavily in Africa. They're utilizing their hegemonic power. They're investing heavily in Africa. So I'd say that in summary, Sahelian states don't need to entirely abandon their ties with France, but they must reform these relationships to be more equitable and sustainable. And at the same time, diversification of partnerships and a focus on regional cooperation will empower these nations to reduce dependency and take greater control of their economic destinies. And I'd say that overall, the goal should be autonomy through balance, leveraging external relationships while also building internal strength as well.
Mr. Arif Malik, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Shazib said. And I had a question for our guest speaker, Risshit, today, since Risshit is very much involved in the fields of geopolitics, having taken courses on politics and such. I wanted to ask Risshit a question to enlighten our viewers. So, given the increasing geopolitical complexity in the Sahel, which has been characterized by foreign military bases from France and growing Chinese economic influence through infrastructure projects, alongside several regional challenges like jihadi-led attacks, devastating droughts impacting subsistence farming, and the ongoing migration crisis targeted by the conflict in northern Mali. Risha, do you believe that international institutions like the United Nations are adequately equipped to address these multifaceted issues in the Sahel, or do you think there is a need for more substantial reforms within the body of the United Nations in order to enhance their effectiveness in regions like the Sahel?
Yeah, Ari, I definitely. The question is very interesting, and I've been researching it about it a lot, and especially since I've been learning French and trying to understand the language. And I think in total, the United Nations should definitely play a pivotal role in like really addressing the migration crisis and many other problems in the Sahel. It's like very deeply intertwined within the region, and like within the region's increasing geopolitical complexity. So, firstly, I think they should target the root cause of migration, for example, from the Sahel. They should maybe target ongoing conflicts fueled by extremist groups, as you said, like jihadi, or even inter-ethnic violence and geopolitical rivalries, push people to flee. And also, the climate change is one of the biggest issues there, like droughts and other climate-related issues, having devastated livelihoods and many children. I know specifically from experience, and I think the UN should definitely support them a lot. And also, why should they intervene? Because the UN has a mandate to protect human rights and provide humanitarian assistance to vulnerable populations, including migrants and refugees. As you know, I'm a very caring person, and I care deeply about the environment and the people of African culture. And through my experiences, I know they're kind people. So I think they should definitely require care. So yeah, that's my opinion on it. So what do you guys think? You concur or do you disagree with me? Yes, Hazib, go ahead.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd like to thank Ari for asking this question, and second of all, Rishi, that was a very insightful response, and I think that was very touching as well, Rishi. Like you almost made me tear up. I know you're a very caring person. You care for the French people, like you care for the people a lot. You're a man of the people, Rishi, and that was very touching. I'd like to say that, and
I appreciate that.
yeah, and to also answer the question, I had my own opinion to Arif's question. I'd say that Arif, it's a very interesting question because international institutions such as the United Nations and the African Union as well, you could say, the World Bank and others as well, play a critical role in fostering global cooperation, conflict resolution, and development. Because as Rich had mentioned, that's their role. But however, their ability to address the increasingly complex geopolitical dynamics is often constrained by structural limitations, political biases, and resource challenges. Because institutions like the UN can mobilize resources and expertise on a global scale to address crises such as security threats in the Sahel, climate change, or economic instability. And agencies like the World Bank and UNDP contribute to a long-term development, focusing on infrastructure, healthcare, and poverty alleviation. And the limitations would be, that states are often reluctant to cede authority to international bodies, limiting their ability to enforce solutions or intervene in conflicts decisively. And institutions, also like powerful nations often dominate decision making processes, leading to biased policies that may not adequately address the needs of smaller or less influential states, such as those in the Sahel. So, it's very tricky because I would say that these international institutions, they should help. It's their role to help, but it's tricky because sovereignty comes into play. Like then you have to ask the question, if they are intervening, then would it be acceptable? Because in a way some people might argue that their sovereignty is being violated, but I don't know, it's a very tricky topic because because while international institutions have the potential to address complex geopolitical challenges, their current structures and approaches are often insufficient. And I'd say to remain relevant and effective, these institutions must adapt by becoming more agile, inclusive, and well resourced in a way, because otherwise they risk being overshadowed by unilateral or competing external influences. So yeah. Yeah, Risshit, you said you wanted to chime in. You have your hand raised, Risshit.
Yeah, Shazib. So, I was just wondering for like a few days, and this question was on my mind, and I couldn't really answer it. So, how can the Sahel countries work together to reduce migration caused by conflict and poverty, and what actions can they really take in the future right now? So, could you guys maybe chime in on that?
Yeah, I think that it's very important that we talk about these issues, but I think it's also important that we understand the historical background about the influence of France on the Alliance of the Sahel States, AASS. So I think that France ruled Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger as part of its West African colonial empire until their independence in the 1960s. And the French policies have significantly influenced the political and administrative systems that of these nations. And these countries were part of the CFA franc monetary system established by France in 1945. Moreover, it was seen as a tool of French economic dominance, where monetary policies, and mind you that monetary policies of a nation are very important, monetary policies were controlled by the French treasury. Moreover, in 2023, members of the my apologies. Members of the AASS pushed for independence from the CFA franc system and a new regional currency initiative. I'm not talking about the French involvement in the military and secret involvement, and I believe that Arif has highlighted some of these issues, which are very important. Obviously, that the operation, I think that was done by France, which was called, I think, Operation Barkhane, which was between 2014 to 2022. It was a French-led counter-terrorism military campaign in the Sahel with 5,100 troops at its highest, and it was focused on Islamist insurgency groups like Al Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, AQIM, and ISGS, Islamic State in the Greater Sahara and the outcomes were that the limited long-term success. Extremist violence persisted or worsened. Over 7,800 civilian deaths were reported in the Sahel in the first 7 months of 2023, compared to fewer than 2,500 during Barkhane's inception year. And the France officially ended Operation Barkhane in 2022 and withdrew remaining troops in 2023 after rising anti-French sentiment. And this shift left a power vacuum, pushing the new formed ASS to pursue self-reliant security strategies through joint military alliances. Moreover, as some of you have highlighted, France was a primary donor of economic development aid to these nations, contributing significantly yearly. Like I think they contributed between $300 to $4 million in Mali in 2021, $140 million in Niger in 2021, and Burkina Faso's $200 million in 2021. And after withdrawal, this system obviously diminished, motivating ACES countries to seek alternate funding sources and economic interdependence. And also, I think there's also a lot of natural resource exploitation. Some of you have highlighted. The France relied on Niger for uranium, which constituted up to 20% of France's uranium needs, which is crucial for its energy sector. And there's also a lot of growing local unrest, which highlighted disparities between resource exploration benefits and economic returns to Niger. So, what do you think of this information about the French? In a way, I would say that it's a French. They were trying to extract resources from the Sahel states in a very colonialistic mindset. So, what do you think of this opinions, Mr. Risshit, Sikka, Shazib Karim, or Mr. Arif Malik?
Yeah, as I said before, it's like a very pressing issue, and this colonial impact on the from the French are like very damaging to the people. So some unique challenges, such as the alliance is navigating, is unprecedented geopolitical shifts. For example, the withdrawal of foreign troops, such as France from Mali, has forced these states to reevaluate their security strategies. And also, some members states are exploring alternative partnerships, such as Mali's engagement with even Russian mercenaries, raising questions about unity within their alliance. So, basically the Sahel states are like basically they're kind of struggling right now, and I think the Alliance of Sahel States is often seen as a potential model for solving African problems with African solutions. It emphasizing collaboration, shared responsibility, and combining security with development could inspire other regions facing similar challenges. And overall, I think it's a very pressing issue. So, like a fun fact, as Arif said, I want to tell you guys about a fun fact. The Sahel is sometimes called the Belt of Baobabs. I learned that in my French class because it is home to Africa's. Sorry, sorry, I'm getting a bit sick. So, yeah, as I said, a fun fact: the Sahel is sometimes called the Belt of Baobabs because it is home to Africa's iconic baobab trees, which can live for over 1,000 years. If you didn't know, so I thought that was very interesting. And getting back to topic, sorry for my fun fact. Yeah, I want to talk about how like the G5 Sahel joint forces, how are they functioning? What are their future plans, you think? And what could it do in the future to maybe expand their opportunities, or maybe their land territory even, or maybe expand to new places? So what do you guys think?
Yeah, that was take yeah, thank you for your information and the fun facts, and Araf, thank you for the background information. And I think to add on more, it's very, I think what the Sahelian states can do is, they can strengthen regional cooperation, because organizations like the Alliance of Sahel States or G5 Sahel need to expand their mandates to focus not just on security but also on development, governance, and climate resilience. And they can also strengthen and fund joint security initiatives, ensuring that local forces are adequately trained and equipped to respond to regional threats. For example, the Multinational Joint Task Force against Boko Haram has shown that regional cooperation can lead to tangible results in combating terrorism. And also, I'd say they could also invest in human capital. For example, prioritizing in education reforms and vocational training to prepare the youth for modern industries and reduce unemployment. And they could also create programs to engage the region's large youth population in nation building activities, reducing their reducing their susceptibility to recruitment by extremist groups. And other alternatives would be, I'd say, like they could reduce external dependence by working towards reducing reliance on former colonial powers or external actors by diversifying alliances and partnerships. And they're going to empower African led institutions like ECOWAS or the African Union to mediate conflicts and drive development. So I think now talking for the future and the vision for the future would be, I'd say that, for a sustainable future, Sahel nations need to focus on building a foundation of peace, self-reliance, and resilience. And the vision includes a stable region, and that could be achieved through coordinated security efforts and an inclusive government. And they also need a thriving economy, and that could be driven by regional trade, local industries, and diverse investments. And I'd say that to be resilient and self-reliant, they also need to be connected by people through education, technology, and cross-border collaboration. So I have a question to ask, if you don't mind. So, do you think, since we've been talking about this, and we've also been talking about the alternatives and what other things could happen, do you think the Sahel nations can achieve this vision through unity and innovation?
Yeah, I believe, in my opinion, that all of the things that have been brought up are very important, and I think that innovation is obviously necessary. But I think it's also important that we talk a little bit about the influence of the French and the cultural education influence of France. For example, the Francophone identity. I think that French still remains the official language and a medium of education in this country, signifying enduring soft power. And despite this, ASS leaders are promoting local languages, cultural identity to diminish Francophone centric narrative. And French also has condemned the coups and the withheld recognition of the ASS, aligning itself with the ECOWAS sanctions. And the reduced military and economic engagement in response to anti-French actions in the region also highlights that the France is France, which is very discontent with the ASS group. So, and I think for your question, I think Shazib, I think a lot of innovations is needed for this countries to grow. And for the thing about the insurgency in these countries, I think it's very important that a lot of military aid is given, not military aid, but I would say that they learn from other regions what they have done. And I think these terrorists themselves, they're fighting against, I think a lot of these countries obviously are not economically very developed, and I think many people join these terrorist groups because they want to have a better life for themselves, or they think that they're going to have a better life when they join them. And I think that it is important these nations, the governments in the ASS, try to resolve this issue by providing people with more opportunities. And with that in mind, I think I have another question for Mr. Shazib Karim or Mr. Risshit Sikka or Mr. Arif Malik. Any one of you can announce it, can respond to it. And I think we should talk a little bit about the cultural influence of France. And for this, my question is: in what ways do you think the ASS leaders can promote a regional identity to counter the Francophone influence? And mind you, that French is still the official language in these countries, and I think that they still speak French in their daily life. So obviously they're connected to France in some manner culturally. So how do you think this ASS the leaders might try to counter that? Mr. Risshit Sikka, Mr. Shazib Karim, Mr. Arif Malik.
Yeah. So sorry for the delay. Yeah, as the ASS greatly strengthened in the ability of Sahel country to respond to the growing threat of extremism and terrorism. For example, the G5 Sahel Joint Forces unites member states in cross-border military operations against terrorist groups like Araf said, like Al Qaeda, ISIS, and Boko Haram. So I was just wondering, Araf, could you please repeat your questions? Was it about the cultural influence, I believe?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, so regarding the cultural dynamics, I think it's quite interesting, and the French, especially the French, and their viewpoints are create a very diverse opportunities for the ASS.
I think Mr. Risshit Sikka is facing internet issues. I think Mr. Shazib's going to hand his raised. Would you like to add on anything, Shazib?
Yeah, I could add on. Sure, Araf. So I think out of US, a very interesting question. I think it's very tricky because no matter what, I'd say influence from France will be deeply rooted and connected with these Sahelian states because, as you had mentioned, Arif, they literally speak the French language. So I think it's very tricky. But then maybe they could emphasize indigenous languages. Implement education systems that prioritize local languages alongside French, and this would preserve indigenous languages while ensuring access to global platforms as well. And they could also celebrate regional languages through national or regional observances that encourage prides in linguistic heritage. For example, there are examples, like for example, countries like Tanzania successfully promoted Swahili as a unifying language, reducing reliance on colonial languages. And they could also invest in regional economic integration, collaborate on large-scale projects such as the Great Green Wall or cross-border trade initiatives that reinforce the region's capacity for self-sufficiency. And also, they could also maybe create their own currencies, create Sahelian currencies and explore the creation of a regional currency to replace the CFA franc, symbolizing financial and political independence. For example, the organization ECOWAS has been working towards launching the eco currency to unify West African economies and reduce dependency on external financial systems.
Yeah, Shazib, I want to add on to your point regarding the languages. Remember, the shared language and historical background provide a foundation for both diplomatic and economic relationships. For example, the French remains an important language of diplomacy, not just within the ASS, but also in broader international forums where Sahel countries engage with France and other global powers. I also want to talk about media and the big impact of media and communication in the ASS. So, for example, many countries in the Sahel, consume French media such as TVF Monday. I remember watching that when I was younger, and RFI, the Radio France Internationale, and also, sorry, and also France 24, which are quite interesting, which are available across the region. These media outlets, influence public opinion and provide a window, into global affairs, often framing discussions through a French perspective. Sorry. Anyway, the exposure to French media also influences how the people of the Sahel, perceive global events, particularly France's roles in Sahelian society and development efforts. Sorry, I'm really sick today. While French culture, dominance can be seen as a unifying force in some ways, but it also has a lot of criticism, particularly in countries like Mali, where anti-French sentiments have been on the rise. So I think there's a lot of cultural impact, the French has had on the ASS, and it's quite important to acknowledge these cultural impacts. So what else do you guys think about this topic, and maybe something about nationalism and how nationalism is tied into the ASS? So could you please elaborate on that?
Mr. Arif Malik, I see hand is raised. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I think what Risshit has asked is a very important question that is pertinent to this topic. Firstly, I would like to talk about some of the points that Shazib brought up regarding the currencies in the Sahel region. And I would say previous attempts to unify Africa under one singular currency, I believe took place under the regime, was going to take place under the regime of Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi, but that couldn't take place due to the obvious political and geopolitical stances. I'm not going to delve into why it couldn't take place, but I would say currently it's important to understand that the world is dollar denominated. Most foreign the foreign currency reserve in most banks, including Africa, is US dollar denominated assets, including M1 and M2 types. therefore I think it's quite hard to at this point in time create currency in African union in African if there was an in the African Union. And also like if BRICS is also trying to create their own currency, I think it's quite hard when the US and its allies already have a very strong currency, for example the euro. So I think maybe if the in my opinion, I think in place of creating their own currency, since their currencies are already very weak, I think they could take aggressive stances. For example, they could use the euro until their euro until the country stabilizes, and then go back to using their old currency. I think this is something that the Argentinian president has in mind. And while his political beliefs are obviously quite controversial, I think economic wise he might be onto something. And additionally, I would like to say that nationalism is a very important issue that must be addressed here. The Sahel is composed of various different tribes, so in order to unify them even under one language is basically impossible. I think French as a language helps to sort of unify everyone, every different ethnic groups there. But I think instead of French, what other language would these countries use? Because there's so many tribes. It's if we look based on utilitarianism, they could choose the language which the most amount of people speaks, and this is usually what happens in multi-ethnic countries, for example, Bangladesh, India, or basically pretty much everywhere in the world where we use the language of many different of the primary ethnic group dominant in the country. So I think maybe using different official language, for example, in the UN where there's Arabic, English, French, Spanish, I think that could be a potential way to reconcile with every different ethnic tribes. And I would say, like, in order to counteract, in terms of nationalism in the African continent, there was this theory of Pan-Africanism that has emerged in the 20th century, and I've read articles and research papers about Pan-Africanism. And I would say Pan-Africanism primarily emerged against the opposers, for example, the colonizers in this case. And it hasn't been really successful, in my opinion, because of the divide and because of the rampant corruption that is prevalent around the Sahel region and also Africa. And then the concept of nationalism itself emerged in Europe during the French Revolution and the subsequent Napoleonic War. So nationalism itself is a very new idea, but given that nationalism has emerged as basically a very important tool to control our country, and in my opinion, nationalism in the Sahel could be achieved under the ethnic nationalism or either through cultural nationalism, because civic nationalism, which is defined by the citizenship in a state or an allegiance to its political institutions and values regardless of one's ethnic background, is often seen in diverse multicultural nations like US or France. And in Africa, I think this could work, but in my opinion, ethnic nationalism could also benefit Africa, as there's a lot of ethnic groups, but this could potentially also lead to some violence, for example the Rwandan genocide that occurred. So in my opinion, civic nationalism is the way to go for Africa. And I would say one of the challenges again that faces the Sahel region predominantly is the militant groups, because the problem with the militant groups is the more amount of militants that you kill, it creates 10 new militants. This was seen in the case of Afghanistan. This was seen in the case of Syria. Militants in the Sahel needs to be controlled, in my opinion, and nations need to rally their nationalistic sentiments to bolster their military campaigns in order to suppress this militant groups, because these militant groups they are essentially they essentially follow a strict interpretation of predominantly Islam. And I would say this strict interpretation is often very I would say, and I wouldn't say it's correct, but I would say rather it's very it's a misinterpretation, if that makes sense. And in that sense, I would say cultural revival needs to happen. There needs to be a resurgence of cultural nationalism focusing on indigenous traditions, languages, and practices. Countries like Mali and Burkina Faso have seen movements aimed at reviving cultural music and art and festivals. And additionally, I think political nationalism in the political arena should take place. I'm not recommending leaders like Idi Amin to occur. And even though Idi Amin himself was a very nationalistic leader, his ideas and his policies were quite controversial. So, in my opinion, Sahel needs to promote new nationalistic leaders instead of basically the warlords that are very prevalent in that area. And regional cooperation, in my opinion, for example, the G5 Sahel, which is a cooperation of a regional framework involving Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Chad, represent a form of regional nationalism and supra-nationalism aimed at addressing shared security. But in my opinion, this isn't very strong because Sahel itself is a very weakly bonded region with very very important and very very perilous issues, particularly regarding militants. So I would say, in my opinion, as someone who has been doing MUN for a lot of years and someone who has studied this topic very much, I would say Sahel needs to first of all overcome these militant groups, and after that they need to think about creating open border systems so that they can foster more trade, and then rely on and then possibly do trade partnership with countries like China, US, or France, depending upon the nation's political sovereignty.
Yeah, very interesting, Ari. Another topic I would like to go into, like the global economy and finance, basically. So as you guys already know, as the date of this recording, the Federal Reserve of the U.S. cut interest rate by roughly 25 basis points, and it has a significant ripple effects on the global economy and especially on the Alliance of Sahel States. So Jerome Powell cut the interest rate by 25 basis points because inflation was going, and I believe Trump was imposing tariffs on other countries and even African countries, I believe, and this led to the higher cost of living and basically inflation. So connecting back to the Alliance of Sahel States, I think more capital might flow into interest. A Fed rate cut typically lowers global borrowing cost, encouraging investors to seek high returns in emerging markets, including the Sahel. Maybe this could result in more capital might flow into infrastructure, energy, and mining projects in the ASSS countries, boosting economic growth. Also, maybe the Sahelian states could even borrow at lower interest rates, helping them fund key projects like transportation, education, and healthcare. So the commodity prices would also have a big impact. So the Sahel countries are, major exporters of commodities like uranium from Niger, gold from Mali and Burkina Faso, and oil from Chad are like very big parts of their economy, as you guys already mentioned. And then this might increase the price of commodities in dollar terms, and this would benefit Sahelian exporters since the price is in dollar. Also, higher prices for gold and uranium could provide a much needed fiscal boost for member states. And I was studying French. I learned a lot about these topics, and I think French is one of the best languages in the world. And I think understanding French really creates a better opportunity for you guys. So anyway, what do you guys think about the financial situation, and how could even the US or maybe even France or the big what do you call it, the more developed more economically developed countries have an effect on the lower LEDC, as you guys remember from global history if you're watching it from ASD? And what do you guys think about the overall financial situation?
Yeah, Risshit, I think you brought up a very interesting topic, talking about the connecting it to the global economy and finance. And I'd say that we can no, sorry. So I'd say that it's a very interesting thing to talk about, because if you look at the interconnectedness of the global economy and the trade, we can see that international trade drives economic growth by enabling countries to specialize in industries where they have a comparative advantage. For example, China excels in manufacturing, while Saudi Arabia capitalizes on all exports. And there are also, like, if you look at the natural resources in the global markets, Niger is one of the world's largest producers of uranium, which is a critical resource for nuclear energy. And French companies like Orano dominate Niger's uranium sector, supplying a significant portion of the uranium needed for France's nuclear power plants. And the implications of this is that Niger's economy heavily relies on uranium exports, but the majority of the profits flow to French companies, leaving little reinvestment for local development. And there's also foreign debt and economic pressure. For example, we can look at Chad. How there's a debt crisis in Chad, and Chad faces significant external debt, much of it owed to global lenders like the International Monetary Fund, aka IMF, and private creditors. And in 2022, Chad negotiated a restructuring deal under the G20 Common Framework, highlighting the region's vulnerability to external debt and dynamics. And then there's also the geopolitical and economic shifts. For example, France's military withdrawal from Mali. In 2022, Mali's government requested the withdrawal of French troops, signaling a shift in its foreign alliances. And the vacuum left by France saw increased Russian influence, with the Wagner Group providing security services. And I'd say that in conclusion, the Sahel's integration into the global economy is both an opportunity and a challenge. Like, I just mentioned the real world examples, from resource extraction in Niger to debt struggles in Chad, illustrate how global economic forces shape the region's realities. For the Sahel to thrive, I'd say that it has to navigate these dynamics by fostering regional cooperation, diversifying partnerships, and investing in sustainable development.
Thank you, Mr. Shazib Karman. I think it's also very important that we look at the comparative advantages these countries have. For example, let's talk about Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso has one of the largest gold. It's one of the world's largest gold producers. In fact, it's Africa's fourth largest gold producer, with gold accounting for nearly 70% of its export revenues. And the mining industry also represents about 15% of the GDP, but has created dependence on foreign capital and international companies. Now, talking about Mali, Mali is also a very important country because it's very agriculturally, I would say, dependent. The population is very agriculture dependent. About 80% of Mali's population depends on agriculture, particularly cotton and millet, while the Niger River flow by significant agriculture, including rice cultivation. And Mali's cotton industry makes it one of the largest cotton producers, though dependent on world patterns and global conditions. And Niger, as Shazib has highlighted, is one of the world's top producers of uranium, accounting for 7% of world's uranium production. It supplies France, which relies on heavily on its uranium for its nuclear power generation, and this dependency on natural resources has led to economic imbalances, while Niger not receiving equal benefits from the uranium mining. Niger is also home to diverse cultures, and so these countries, as we can see, is very much they have a lot of natural resources. So how do you think this Alliance of Sahel States, how do you think they can take advantage of this natural resources that they have to make a lot of money? How do you think they can do it? For example, we can see the Gulf Cooperation Council, they have done because all of the countries in the Gulf Cooperation Council, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, the Qatar and Bahrain and Kuwait, all of them are rich in oil, and that's why they have working together to make sure that they whatever they do benefits their people. And I do think that these countries, the Alliance of Sahel States, could do something like that. Mr. Arif Malik, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, apologies, the mic wasn't turning on. So yeah, I think it's a very good question, and I agree with everyone here. And I would like to say, like the Sahel is obviously very rich in natural resources, and therefore these countries must coherently adopt comprehensive approaches that not only enhance economic benefits but also promote sustainable development and improve the overall well-being of their populations. You have mentioned OPEC, and I think OPEC cartel, that is the way that economists describe it, is have an oligopoly in the natural resource market, particularly in the export of hydrocarbon resources like oil and natural gas. And these Sahel nations obviously have advantage over there. They're naturally blessed. However, the problem is that their resources are essentially has been exploited in the past, and even today their resources are not being distributed equally among the people. And I think Leonardo DiCaprio made a very famous film about this situation called Blood Diamond, released in 2006, in which he basically shed light on the extortion and the extortion of natural resources in South Africa. But I think that's applicable to the Sahel as well. And in my opinion, in order to become the next Saudi or next Qatar, these Sahel nations need to enhance, in my opinion, first their resource governance, because first of all, it's no secret that these Sahel nations are very, very much corrupt. In fact, they are one of the most corrupt nations in the world. That lead the charts on a regular basis, and therefore I think implementing transparent mechanisms for the management of resource revenues can help mitigate corruption. And additionally, tools such as the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative (EITI) provide frameworks for government to disclose information about resource extraction and manage revenues more transparently. Additionally, I think they need to develop a local industry to add value to raw materials before they are exported, and this can significantly increase the economic benefits of natural resources. Because currently, these nations are export oriented, but majority of the exports are, they're not exporting. The low domestic companies are not exporting anything. The foreign companies are basically coming to these Sahel region, digging up the mines themselves, and then exporting these natural resources to themselves, if that makes sense. And so, in my opinion, they need to make a domestic market first of all. Without the domestic market, these countries cannot become rich. And additionally, I think on top of the domestic market, they need to create a regional cooperation in which they can sort of all the suppliers or producers in the market can come together and say, like, for instance, that if the price is not more we will not sell our let's say diamond for 1 carat if it's the price is not minimum $500, let's say that, hypothetically speaking. And this will create a cartel, and this will also ensure that they have oligopoly in the market, and only through this can they ensure that the price, they can control the prices. Because we have to understand, they don't have there are basically no suppliers in the world who can compete against them. These guys have the resources. They just need to think smartly in this case, and just ensure that the resources that they have, they can basically create a monopolistic sort of market, and then jack up the price and then sell it at a high profit. That's what the Middle Eastern countries have been doing, and that's the reason how the Middle Eastern countries in the 1980s, from basically being sand dunes, they have now become utopias essentially. And I think if the African countries, specifically in the Sahel, recognize this and implement this, they will soon become the next Middle East, and they can soon become. They can also uplift themselves economically.
Yeah, I think Ari, that's quite interesting, and just like to add on, like on the Arabs, my bad, Araf's question. You guys are names very similar. Sorry for the mispronunciation. Anyway, Niger is one of the largest producers of uranium, critical research for nuclear energy. I remember French companies like Orano dominates uranium sector. Maybe I think Niger could even push for greater share profits from French mining companies, and instead of exporting raw uranium, Niger can invest in facilities to process uranium or locally, creating jobs and increasing revenue. So I think, let's get back. I want to talk about an interesting story. Yeah, sorry, my internet.
I think Mr. Risshit Sikka is having. I think Mr. Risshit Sikka is having internet issues. Mr. Shazad, can I say? I think Mr. Risshit Sikka could. I I think Mr. Risshit Sikka is having internet issue. Mr. Shazib Kar, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, sure, Araf. I can also add on my personal opinion on this, and I think what Arib was saying was very interesting, because Arib, you had mentioned the Blood Diamonds, which was it was a very touching movie. And so coming back to the point and talking about how they can really utilize their resources, as you had mentioned, Arab. And I'd say that currently Sahelian states primarily export raw materials, which limits their share of profits and leaves them vulnerable to price influences in global markets. And the solution could be to build local refineries, smelters, and manufacturing plants to process raw materials like gold and uranium domestically. And they could shift from exporting raw resources to producing finished goods such as jewelry or refined uranium fuel, which command higher market prices. And like, for example, we can look at Botswana, as Botswana transformed its diamond industry by processing gems locally, increasing revenues and creating job opportunities as well. And they could also strengthen resource governance and contracts, because many resource extraction contracts disproportionately benefit foreign companies with limited returns for local economies. And the solution could be to push for fairer terms with foreign investors, ensuring a large share of profits and reinvestment in local development. Like, for example, Norway's sovereign wealth fund, financed by all revenues, demonstrates how resource wealth can be managed transparently and invested for future generations. And another factor that they could do is, I think another problem that they have is that many Sahelian countries spend resource revenues as they are earned, with little left for future generations. And their solution could be that they could establish sovereign wealth funds to save resource revenues, stabilize budgets during commodity price swings, and invest in long-term development. And they could also ensure that these funds are independently managed with strong oversight to prevent corruption. For example, Alaska's permanent fund uses all revenues to provide dividends to residents while also funding public services as well. So yeah, Risshit, you have your hand raised. Do you want to add anything else?
Yeah, just to conclude this segment, I want to talk about a very interesting story about my dad. Yeah, as you guys know, I'm part African, half African, especially from Niger, and half Indian. So yeah, my dad was basically one of the secretaries for the founding of the ASS last year, and I recently moved to Bangladesh as my academic endeavors. So yeah, my dad's journey to creating ASS was sorry. Yeah.
For today. So based on our discussion, I think the conclusion we can draw is the Alliance of Sahel States (ASS) represents a significant shift in the region's approach to self-determination, security, and economic autonomy. And comprising Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, this newly formed coalition reflects the growing desire among the Sahelian nations to distance themselves from foreign dominance, particularly from France, what has historically played a prominent role in their politics. Military and economics, and looking forward, the ASIS will need to strike a delicate balance between fostering regional stability, sovereignty, and establishing the kind of partnership that will allow for long-term prosperity without regressing into political dependence on economic vulnerability. And external players such as China, external players could also influence this trajectory, providing new opportunities for economic growth. And although ultimately the success of the alliance with Sahel States will depend on its ability to adapt to the volatile changes it faces, while remaining true to its vision of regional unity and autonomy. Is that a conclusion that all of you would agree with? Mr. Risshit Sikka, Mr. Shazib Karim, Mr. Arif Malik?
Yeah, I agree.
Yes, me too.
I agree.
Thank you for all of your agreements, and that brings us to the end of episode 34. My apologies, and thank you for all of your agreements, and that brings us to the end of episode 34, the influence of France on the Alliance of Sahel States. Mr. Risshit Sikka, thank you so much for joining us today. Are there any final words that you would like to say before we depart for today? Yeah, so apologies everyone. Mr. Sikka is having internet issue. That brings us to the end of episode 34, the influence of France on the Alliance of the Sahel States. And thank you to everyone for joining today and listening to our episode discussion. I hope that you really enjoyed it. And again, apologies from Mr. Sikka, Mr. Risshit Sikka, for the internet disconnections and internet issues. And thank you everyone for listening to this episode, which is episode 34, the influence of France on the Alliance of the Sahel States. Thank you everyone. This is the end for today, and we hope to see you next week with another very interesting topic, with another very interesting guest speaker. Thank